So our spring seasonal series, we thought we'd go back to basics and cover some SQL Server 101 stuff. Admittedly today, right, it might even be like SQL Server 100. But as I mentioned before, if you have questions or you have something that you wanted to go over, feel free to put those into the chat. We're going to present material, and then we'll circle back to your questions. So having said that, let's introduce ourselves. So I'm joined today with Mr. Cardell Washington. Welcome, Cardell.
Hey, how's everybody? Hope everybody's doing well. So quick introduction, of course, about me. I'm a data analytics professional, over a decade of experience. I'm really into technology. So I like solving problems, of course, with technology, right? And so with that, I'm married. I have 7 children. So of course I'm creative as well with having to deal with different, children, different attitudes in different ways. And so just to, be and hang out with them, right? We play video games, board games, and, kind of anime and stuff like that. So it's a little bit about me and kind of what I do.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you, and I know that the folks that are here, we have a pretty good crowd. I think they've all come to see you because they're like, well, I know this Carlos guy, and so hopefully we get a little something different today.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So I am Carlos Chacon, right, founder of SQL Data Partners, and I only have 5 kids, but one of the great things about being in the database community is I've been able to get around and meet folks like Cardell, like some of our other consultants, and that's been really neat. So we're excited to bring this to you here all today. So a couple of assumptions. As we're coming in as a level 100 or 101. You don't have to know a whole lot. Our thought, however, is that you have some semblance of what a database is, right? Tables, columns, views, that at least that idea is not completely foreign to you. Don't worry, right? Today, we are going with a no-code solution. Now, we will ultimately show some coding options, but you won't have to know any code for today. Let's see. And then, but if you do want to get into some code before the next session, start practicing that SQL, right? There's this bloke that I know wrote a book available on Amazon. You're welcome to check that out. If you want to get the digital copy, a lot of times it's free, right, on the Kindle version. So. And then if you like it, right, I'd love it if you left us a review there. Okay, so our agenda for today is we want to go through and do an introduction of SQL Server Management Studio. We're then going to talk about some install components, so SQL Server installation, review pieces, and then finally talking about backups. So that's our agenda for today. And so, yeah, I guess with that, as we get into the Management Studio, what we are talking about is using this tool. So depending on your version, you may see an icon, something like this. So hopefully if you have that installed already. If not, you'll have to install that. And we'll make sure that the download link are available maybe in the chat. We can even get that here in a second. But then in the notes that follow this presentation as well. And so as we dive into that, right, let's get out of these slides and let's go ahead and dive right into Management Studio.
Awesome. So let me take over the screen and get us started. So this is probably where everybody starts out at, right? To pull their SQL Server, or excuse me, you probably go to your tabs down below and pull it up, right? But this is the start of what Management Studio looks like. And so the first thing you're actually going to do once you look to get into Management Studios, of course, is how to connect. And so there's, of course, a few ways that you want to get in here and look at your servers that you're connected to within SQL. So you find the instance that you want to go to. Of course, I'm using my laptop, so I'm going to do localhost. If you're on your server, you can put localhost, or if it's a named instance, right, you put the name up top. But the next part, which is important, is determining what authentication method you're actually going to get into your environment with. You can either use a Windows authentication, which of course, if a laptop, you're using your current, or if you're, on a server, it's using AD, or you can use SQL Server authentication, right? Which is essentially like logging into, a website, right? You put your username, password, and it'll let you in. But what we're going to do for our demonstrations, we're going to use Windows authentication and connect. So now you're inside of the environment, right?
If you have SQL Server installed locally, you can use that local host. Or if someone else is giving you the name, right? It's like, hey, we need you to connect to this. They will provide that name for you.
Definitely good. Great point. So, and of course, they can use a period, right, for the local host as well. So while you're in here, right, you see the Object Explorer, which is always on your left-hand side. Sometimes on the right-hand side, you'll see something called Solution Explorer, or you may possibly see Properties, right? Just depends on if you've already had it set up and how things are looking. But within this Object Explorer, right, down here, you can see the instance that we chose to connect to and all of the different kind of folders, right, that are organized within Object Explorer to let you know what you can do and has available to you within SQL Server. So we're going to go down the database path, and you can see within the databases, I have a couple databases here for us to look at, and we're actually going to see how you can pull data out of just this view. So let's open up our VentureWorks database, and let's grab a good table. Let's look at employees. So when you right-click on one of the tables, it gives you options, right? And of course, within Management Studios, or SSMS as we call it, right? There's always options available to you when you right-click. So in here, we're going to select the top 100 rows. And that's going to pull up our query window. And as you've seen, it popped up two windows, right? The top is our query window. And of course, the bottom is our result plane. And so within here, right, you can tell that everything is ordered just how we posted our columns out from, left to right. Okay. Now, one of the additional things that you'll notice through here is there are colors, right? So the colors that you see in here let you know different things about what's happening. So we have green, right, that shows you it's commented out. So it's a comment. There are reserved words that are blue. So like select, top, or even from, right? Black are normally just general text. But there's also a couple other ones that stand out that you may see. You may see things like max. Oh, that's not max, right? Which is essentially a system function. Or you may see like an operator, which is like null, right? Or you can see delete, right? Or you may even see strings, right? Which go into like a where statement. So you'll see those different things within SQL that shows colors and what's actually happening within the environment.
Yeah, so one of the interesting pieces here is, and to state the obvious perhaps, so SQL Server Management Studio, which we might sometimes refer to as SSMS, is the interface we're going to use to tell the database what we want it to do. In this example, Cardell has asked it to give it data, right, by using a select statement. We could be inserting data, updating data. We could want it to do a command like making a backup. So this is the interface that we're using to be able to interact with that database. SQL Server, or the SQL Server Management Studio rather, is helping us out with those keywords and letting you know, hey, just so that are you sure that you want to do this kind of a thing?
Now, in addition to that, right, you also see these numbers on the side, right? And these are going to be some small tips, right, to kind of understand and enhance what you're doing here. So inside of the query window, we can make some changes in the tools, right? So we can go to options, and the first thing we can actually do is we can go to fonts and colors, and you can actually change the size, right? Maybe you're, you need a larger font, right? Or you want to change some default colors, right? You can make that font larger in this pane. Now, that is to make it permanent. Another way to do it, right, would be down here on the far left, where if you needed to change it because you're in a presentation, right, or something's going on and somebody needs to see really well, and it's just for a few seconds, or for a session, you can change that size there. Now, in addition to that, one of the other things that is, always important is down here in the text editor and in the Transact SQL, you can actually add word wrap, right? So sometimes you might get a query that, somebody asked you to tune or somebody on the dev team has written, right? And it expands the entire screen. Well, once you add on word wrap, right, it'll bring it down just like all the other Windows programs. And of course, one of the other important ones, right, is line number. So you want to go make sure you're in Transact SQL, word wraps, put that on, as well as line number. Now, line number, right, is really helpful. So when me and Carlos may be presenting and, I'm tuning code, he can say, hey, look at line 16 and you see there's an error, right? And he can pick out my error instead of us just looking at lines of code, right? Tons of lines of code. And I'm like, where? Move up one, move down one, move over. It becomes a headache.
Yeah.
So, make sure, if you guys are ever working using Management Studios, of course, to pull data, insert data, you also have ways that you can change font size, colors, and different things like that that are going to be really important, when you're trying to navigate that environment.
Yeah, so that's the very high level overview from an introduction to Management Studio. So now let's take a peek at some of the database administration pieces that you may want to know about or be familiar with in Management Studio. The first one we're going to take a peek at is the SQL Server logs.
All right. So let's go down to SQL Server logs. Now, SQL Server logs is actually within the management folder. And so the SQL Server logs essentially allows us to understand some information within SQL, right? So if you wanted to know if there were issues, were your backups running, whether they're log backups or full backups, were there users that were trying to use an account within your environment, right, that they couldn't get in with? All of those things, or a lot of those things, let me say, are contained in the SQL Server logs. This gives you a good history. So if you look here on the left-hand side, there are, of course, one active one, right? But there are archive ones. So there's 6 different ones that are available to us for us to actually go through and look through logs. So if something happened 2 days ago and somebody complained and say, hey, 2 days ago, somebody, I couldn't log in, right? You can look here and kind of go through and say, oh, it looks like, people were trying to log in, something was happening, right? And you can address that and use this for troubleshooting techniques. Now, one of the other things within the log, of course, is that, as you see, there's only about 6 of them, right? So if you needed more, we can go here, configure, and we can increase those to 7, 8, 9, right? Just depending on how long you need them, the size of them, right, can cause some issues. So those are settings that you have the availability to play with and adjust to make sure that you have all the information you need in a log on a consistent basis.
Right. So because the log by default only gets cycled, meaning you only get a new one every time SQL Server gets restarted, the logs can grow to be just a little bit unwieldy sometimes. So one of the things we can do is actually force the log to reset, to recreate. So if there was particular testing that I was doing, or for some reason I thought, you know what, I just want to start from this time, I can actually cycle the log. And again, right, we said that this would be a low-code solution, and unfortunately we have to run that command. But when we do that, we'll get a new log, and everything will be new again, right? It will be refreshed, and we don't necessarily have to go look through all the history.
Yeah, and also, right, you would essentially put this into a job, right, that you may run at a particular time. So you can do that, right? Depending on that process, you can have that in a job to run.
That's right. So that would be lovely. If you wanted to level up and automate it, right, you could do that.
Definitely. So another place, right, that we can look at to view logs and the information is going to be in this thing called extended events. And so to get to your extended events, of course, again, this is all still under the management tab, and you want to right click on this system health. Okay. And it says watch live view. And once we click on that, we can see additional system log information. I just have this up here, within the environment, right? So one of the main things that we wanted to show and point out is that you can capture deadlocks within the environment. So when a deadlock, of course, happens, you can go into the extended events and capture that information and kind of see what's going on here. We do have another session that's going to go into extended events. I don't want to go too deep into it, but just as a high level, you can definitely see deadlocks that are captured. They may not be captured in the log, but they're definitely captured in the extended events for SQL Server.
Yeah, and we'll admit, I guess as Cardell mentioned, we are going to expand on this in our next session, but we wanted to make sure that you were at least aware of it. It can be, I'll admit, a little bit of a needle in a haystack when you just open it up like that.
Yep.
But we thought it was important that you at least know that it was an option for you to look for information, that SQL Server is doing that for you by default on your behalf. Now, there are some older versions which is not available, and if for whatever reason you don't see extended events, you can come talk with us about upgrading your system.
Definitely.
Okay, so the last piece, and I think before we move on, can you actually go back to the extended events window, Cardell?
Oh, sure.
When you first look at yours, it will look slightly different, and there is a way to add additional columns to that.
Oh yeah, great point.
Yeah.
So give it a second to load on up, right?
Oh yeah, which is why we had it up in the first place. I apologize.
You're good. You're good.
Will it not let us add the columns until it's loaded?
Yeah, because so it has to essentially have those available columns for whatever sessions, right, populate. And then once they populate, right, then we can add the additional columns.
Oh, got you.
To the table.
There we go.
And so if there's more information, right, that we're gathering or writing from or pulling, they'll show up here. And so each of those columns, right, are essentially available based on what data is actually pulled, because all of them don't have the same information.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure we made that point.
Yep. Okay, and the last piece that we wanted to go over from an interactive perspective is the SQL Server Agent.
Oh, so this is, right, the best part, because SQL Server Agent allows you to create and schedule jobs within your environment, right? So
the automation pieces.
So when you open it up, you can look and see, of course, right, you can see the jobs on an individual basis. But the main way that, most of us look at SQL Server Agent jobs is through the Job Activity Monitor. And let's make that larger so we can see what's going on here. So in here, of course, we create jobs, right, where I have a backup job. And in here, you can see, is it enabled? What's the status, right? Did it fail or succeed? When it ran and the next time it's set to run, right? So let's look actually at the history of the current job. And so in here, you can see it's, when it ran, but there's also information about the job that you can capture. So who ran the job, right? And of course, any message or history that goes into it. So within T-SQL statements, right, if it failed or succeed, you can get a result. If it's an SSIS package, it may tell you to go somewhere else, right? Just depending on what you have in there, you get output, but the basic output is always here at the top. The other thing you can get, right, is, of course, as you see jobs that have failed, directly come up as failed. You'll see them with the red X, and it lets you know exactly what happened during that process. So let's see if we can see from the history why this actually failed. Look, and it says unable to determine if the owner has access to the machine. Lucky me.
Yeah, cool. Your mileage is going to vary there, but at least, again, it's an opportunity for you to take a peek there. So that is our quick introduction to SQL Server Management Studio. All right, we hope you've enjoyed it.
So then the next space that we're going to, I guess, go into, right, is the instance level kind of things, right? The post-install checklist that you're going to go over. So let me move over here, Carlos, and get into, so we're going to connect to the instance, right? And so at the top level, of course, you understand the instance for your environment. And so we're going to right click and head on down to our properties.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, that top level, Cardell used the word instance. SQL Server is another word they used for it. Those terms can be interchanged a lot of times. Yeah.
So at the instance properties level, right, you can see tons of information after your install. You can see the name of the instance that you're on, what version of SQL Server you may be utilizing, right? Some of the more important things, of course, are the version of SQL, how much memory is on the machine, how many processors it has, and where the root directory is located for your install. So to get into the details about how much SQL is actually using for these things, the first place we're going to look at is the memory, right? So right now, of course, I have my memory set at, max server memory is about, 8 gigs or so, right? And so one of the things that you'll see when you first open SQL Server, depending on what version is installed or who installed it, is SQL is set to, I think the default is 2 terabytes. Right, so that's going to completely consume your server, your laptop, or whatever it's on. And so for best practice, right, we like to set it to about 80% of the server or the machine memory, and then the rest of it's for the OS. Now, if you have other applications on there, right, you have to take into account if application A takes 4 gigs, the OS you need 4 gigs. You have, multiple applications, so you need to allocate memory appropriately, but you want to ensure that SQL essentially doesn't consume your entire server during that process. So you want to make sure that is not set to 2 terabytes and that you manage it based on the other applications that are available.
Yeah, that's right. Production environments is important, but can also apply to your laptops as you're testing. You get a large set, or you try to test something out. You're like, let me let that run for a while, right? It could make your machine unhappy, and that's a way to limit the impact to your laptop.
Definitely. The next thing, of course, you can look at is processors. Most people, most of you guys, we won't cover that in this one. But another important thing that we talked about in the very beginning was security, right? How people actually get into your environment. And so there's 2 ways, right? There's the Windows authentication, or you can do Windows and SQL Server authentication, right? And so that's, of course, the difference between AD or the application-based login type. And then the next thing we're going to get in is your database settings. So, of course, you can see the data files, the log files, and backups. Now, obviously, we're on a laptop, so this is kind of one of those, do as we say, not as we do type deals, right? Where you always want all of these on their own separate disk and locations, basically for performance as well as, recovery standpoint, right? But you would want to have your data on the D drive, your log on the log drive, and of course your backups into another location. Now there is one file that is missing from here, but it's a conversation is going to go into the database settings, right? And as opposed to the instance level settings. So let me hop over there. Carlos, you have something to add before I jump over to that?
Yeah, so all of these settings affect the server in its entirety, right? Again, at the instance level, at the SQL Server level. So now let's dive in. There actually are some knobs we can look at a database from a database perspective that can be important to us. And we're going to look at one in particular is TempDB.
So TempDB, of course. So let's right click on that and go over to properties. And it's under the system databases, right? Because of course there's 4. So let's go into here. And within the database properties itself, right, you can see where that particular file is or files are located, right? So you've seen that we had everything from an instance level located on the C drive, right? And so when we got into the particular databases, now we can see where those are at. And so one of the performance things you want to make sure you look at when essentially, you have your SQL install is that your TempDB should be equal to the number of processors, right, within the environment. And so let me clarify that as well, right? So best practice, we essentially have 1 to 1 up to 8. So let's say you have 4, right? You might just see 4 and that's perfectly fine. If there are more, right, there is a formula that we go through to tweak that so that you can make sure that you're getting the best performance out of TempDB. But of course, that's a little more advanced, and that's for a later discussion. So let's go. Of course, you can look at the options, right, of the databases as well and what recovery they're in. But, there's instance level options as well as database level options as well.
One of the other pieces we wanted to talk about was the service account.
Ooh.
So how are we running our SQL Server?
So there's actually two ways, right, that we want to make sure we talk about that. There's one way, of course, that you can run, again, no code, but we want to make sure that people are aware that you can actually run a script for the newer version of SQL Server, right? That you can actually get what service is running on here and what account is being used. Now, of course, I'm using my laptop, right? So these are just running on the local services, but you want to set these to domain accounts, okay? Now, other than here, we can also see these in the services, application, to pull that up, and you can see additional information about SQL Server. So you can see the name of the instance, right? You can see, is it set up to start automatically? Is it set to manual or disabled? And so one of the things that most of the times, right, you want this on automatic because, of course, if you're doing reboots or you're setting up Windows updates, right, you want your server to come back online once that reboot or update has happened. In addition to that, if you need to change the service account, you can do that here. Now, one of the things, right, to point out is when you're going through here and you may want to change the service account, you do have to restart, right, or as they call it, bounce the instance of SQL Server. And so that's something that comes up to SPNs, right, which are the server principal names.
Before we jump into SPNs, you'll forgive me, Cardell.
Yeah, you're good.
So on the automatic versus manual, we talked about the production already, right? But the if you are local, it might be useful to have them be manual, so that way SQL Server is not starting until you actually need it or want it.
Yeah, no, fair enough, because I definitely leave it off on my laptop until I'm ready to use it, right? And so just, on the point of SPNs, we'll actually send some information about how to set those SPNs up using a particular tool from Microsoft called Kerberos Configuration Manager. And so, we'll send that out at the end of the presentation, but that's really a really important part to realize and remember when you're changing the service accounts for SQL Server.
If you're setting one up and getting a weird connection error, right, you might check that out. The last piece that we wanted to take, the last piece we wanted to talk about, again, from an introduction perspective, is backups. So there are many different ways to perform backups, right? Again, with us doing the introduction to Management Studio, we wanted to start from the basics and show you how to walk through that. So to take an individual backup, I can right click, I go into tasks, and I'm going to do backup. For these purposes, I'm taking a full backup. I'm getting everything, right? That's what that means, is full. The only parameters that I need is where do I want that backup to stay, right? Where am I putting that to? So in my case, I am going to put it on backup, and then I'm doing DBA report builder live example. Now, again, there are more options available to you, but from out of the gate, I just need to know that I'm taking a full backup and I'm writing to disk. That can also be a network share. So if you're using, familiar with the network name, you can also write to it to a network location. In this case, I'm just writing to my D drive. I click OK, and now I have another backup available to me. Common issues with backups is not knowing how big those are and not having enough space. And SQL Server will let you know if that is the case, or in some cases, not having permission to write to where that is. So those are some common questions or common issues. Now, quickly, we're going to want to automate those. And while again, there are more advanced pieces, SQL Server gives you the ability to create maintenance plans. So when I take that backup, it's a point in time. Give me everything that you've got to that point. Well, what about tomorrow, right? What about the next day? I, on a more regular basis, may want to take those backups. So I'm going to create a way for me to automate that backup. I can do this with the maintenance plan wizard. So here I am just going to do full backup. Let me do a full backup. When do I want to schedule this? Right? I want to schedule it, Sundays at midnight. I may want to do that every day at midnight. Whatever makes the most sense for you, I schedule it. And while there are a variety of options, we're focused just on the backup. So again, this backup database full. And I'm going to continue. And again, just like on the screen previously, we need to know, in this case, which databases we're backing up, because we now have the option of backing up more than one. So I want to include everything in my list here. Okay. And just like we had it, just like we had the other job, where do I want to put it? Okay. So again, I am going to put mine in D backup. So with those pieces, I can now actually create, or have an automated way to now create the backup. And you'll notice that I am going to get, we're leveraging all the pieces that we've talked about now, in that we've used the GUI, we have a maintenance plan, and now we're actually going to have an agent created for us. Oops, this finishes. It's nothing like doing it live. There we go. It was a little gun shy for you, everybody. So now when I look in the job, I will see this is the automation piece that is going to run on the schedule to do my backups for me. Now, again, those full backups are great when I want to do point in times, right? So in this case, every day at midnight, I'm going to get a snapshot. But as the saying goes, the show must go on, and my users are working during the day. So how do I keep track of the changes in between? We do that using a transaction log backup. Now, in order to use a transaction log backup, two things have to be true about your database. First, the database has to be in full recovery mode. So if you look at the properties and then options, this recovery model must say full. Now remember, what we're trying to do is capture the in-between, right? And that is different than the fulls. When I change my, or when I have my database, or let me say that again. When my database is in full recovery model, I now have two things that I am backing up. There's one, the data, and then two, I'm going to call it the log, or the pieces in between. Okay, and they do not do the same thing. So the full will not back up the log, right? And the log will not back up all of their data, right? It only cares about the in-between. So the second piece that I need is that I need to have already taken a full backup. Okay. So in order for me to take another log backup, my full backup has to already have been done. So since I'm going to use the same database that I took my backup earlier, I'm using the same window, only in this case, I am going to use this transaction log backup. Again, I give it a location of where I want it to go. And I will take the backup. There we go. And again, I can do the same thing with the automation pieces, in that the maintenance plan can help me automate those pieces. And like everything, this is the 101 option, and there are ways to level that up, which we will actually get to in future sessions. So now, how do we know that our backups are happening? Now, one way is to look, for example, what we saw earlier is the history of our, and I happened to click on something that I didn't check prior to clicking record. Well, we can look at the history of our jobs, right? So are the jobs running? And the jobs can notify us if they fail. That's something we can set up. But if we are stewards of our databases, we want to make sure, we want to check the checker. It's worth that little bit of time to do that. So each database provides, if I go into reports, the backup and restore events report. Now, it's fairly basic, but it will show me some of the history that's happening there. Now, you'll notice that, again, I'm doing that on a individual basis. Here it's telling me here the backups that I've had, and I can see that history. Look at the dates. Well, I may not want to have to do that for every single database, particularly if I have lots of them. I'd like to be able to automate that. So here at SQL Data Partners, we have created our database backup report using the SQL Server Reporting Services technology, which will go through and allow you to get the history for those backups. And then we, as you can see, we give you our 2 cents as to whether those backups are up to date or not, right? So I've already shown you how to take the backup through the GUI. Just for simple, or for time perspective, I'm going to use the code. Oh, and there is one thing that I failed to mention, or wanted to mention rather. So let me just go through this again. So in the event that I have this and then I say, yes, this is what I want full, let me just do this again. One option that I do have is, let's just say for whatever reason, again, I'm doing some testing and I need to take a backup now, and I'm going to need to take a backup in, whatever, at the end of the day. I do have the option of scripting this out. So now everything that I've put in here, SQL Server is going to create the code for me to be able to do that. So as you start getting more familiar with the code and you say, okay, well, I'm going to take one now, right? Perhaps to the GUI, or I could run this just as well. And then later I'm going to come back and add a 2, although you're going to be better than that, right? You're going to put something a little bit more descriptive in that file name. And you can now run this later and don't necessarily have to go through the GUI. So that was, again, future proofing. Okay, so now that I've taken a backup of this database, I can refresh the report, and you can see now that it's changed, right? The report's changed. So where is this available? So this report can be downloaded. There's reports available there. You can download it and start looking at your environments to double check the backups. This is our instruction on how to get started with backups. In 2 weeks, we're going to have the next session of our SQL Trail seasonal series, SQL Server Monitoring 101. In that session, we're going to expand our knowledge of extended events, how to get started there. We are going to do an intro into some PowerShell scripting with some nifty work that the folks over at DBA Tools have been doing to make it a little bit easier for us to get started. We're going to go over a script called Who is Active, and then get into some of the other monitoring that's available in Management Studio. We hope that you'll come out and check out that session in 2 weeks. There we go. Well, I think you've been a great crowd.
Hey, thank you guys so much for your time, and we'll see you in the chat.
There you go. Thanks, everybody.
SQL Data Partners.